Well, I've told you this story before. When I was a little boy, I had one of those portable record albums. You know, the ones that had the handle and it opened up like a little box? And I used to love coming home from school and playing my record albums on that little record player. And one of my favorite record albums back then was called Free to Be You and Me. How many of you remember that one? Oh, quite a few of you. Well, Free to Be You and Me was an album of songs and stories for children that were performed by celebrities at the time, people like Marlo Thomas and Diana Ross and Michael Jackson, just to name a few. I remember there was one by the big burly football player Rosie Greer, and it was called It's All Right to Cry. And then there was one by Alan Alda of MASH, and it was called William's Doll, and it was about a little boy who wanted to play with a doll. And the whole concept of the album was to tell little children that it was okay to be who they wanted to be, that little boys could play with dolls and cry, girls could play sports, everybody should have the freedom to be who they are, to do what makes them happy. And of course, that is what we're celebrating this holiday week, this Independence Week, is we're celebrating that freedom. And that's what our country was founded on. Our founding mothers and fathers, they wanted to leave behind the rulings of a king. They wanted to leave behind the Church of England and its control. They were seeking a place where all people could be equal, where all people could have a voice. And they wrote a beautiful declaration of that independence, in which they stated that everybody has 3 inalienable rights, rights that can't be taken away: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which means the ideal of the United States of America is that all people can live how they want to live, love who they want to love, worship how they want to worship, express themselves how they want to express themselves, and to pursue whatever it is that brings them happiness. That's the ideal. But as we heard in our words of integration this morning, we have missed the mark here. Although it's the ideal of our founding mothers and fathers, we haven't had a great track record of freedom in our country's history. And I'm not just talking about slavery, I'm talking about the time that many of us grew up in. Many of us growing up grew up at a time where black people in this country had to drink from separate water fountains and sit at the back of a bus. That's not freedom. Many of us in our lifetimes lived at a time when women were expected to stay home and raise children. That's not freedom. Many of us grew up in a time when gay people had to stay hidden in the closet. That's not freedom. But also in our lifetime, something very exciting happened. We had women's liberation, and we had civil rights, and we had gay liberation. And just in our short lifetimes alone, we have seen more and more people being given those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've seen that happen in our midst. Now, during those liberation movements, many of those people who were taking to the streets were being called un-American. But the truth of the matter is they were the true Americans. Because what they were doing was doing what our country was founded on, making sure that all people could pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's very interesting to me how today in America, many of the people who claim to be the biggest patriots, the people who fly the biggest American flags, are often the ones who are most intolerant of anyone who's different. They are the ones who are most intolerant of people who are not Christian or heterosexual or white. That's not patriotism. These are people who want to keep freedoms from people. They're people who want to build walls, who want to ban people from coming to our country because of their religion. These are people who want to keep transgender people from using bathrooms and to keep wedding cakes away from gay couples. These are people who want the 10 Commandments displayed in public places like city halls, and to have nativity displays in front of public buildings at Christmas. These are people who want prayer in public school. And what they forget is that this country is for all people, not just Christians. This country was not founded as a Christian nation. John Adams, the second president of the United States, said, and I quote, "The United States of America is in no sense whatever founded on the Christian religion," end quote. Our founding fathers, people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, they were not church-going Christians. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, had a well-worn copy of the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu holy text. He had a well-worn copy of the Quran, the Muslim holy text. But Thomas Jefferson said he had no need of the Bible. In fact, Thomas Jefferson famously cut up a Bible. He just cut out the words of Jesus. He threw the rest away. He said he had no use for it. Now, even though Christian Americans today hear that, they still believe that being a good American means being a good Christian. And they say, but on our currency it says, "In God we trust." In our Pledge of Allegiance we say, "One nation under God." But the founding fathers didn't use those words. Those words came around in the 1950s. Many of you in this room were alive in the 1950s. It is not that long ago. That's when those words were added. And they were added because it was during the McCarthy era, when people were being tried for being un-American. It was at that time that churches began to display American flags on their altars. But that was not the intention of our founding fathers and mothers. Then there are the patriots who say, "America is the greatest country. We're number one." But if you believe that we're the greatest and that we're number one, then you think everyone else is beneath you. And that is not what we believe. We believe that everyone is equal. We are not greater than anyone else. We need to change this whole way of thinking about what patriotism is. We need to go back to what our country was founded on. This place where all people are equal, where all people have the freedom to pursue whatever it is that makes them happy. That's what we are celebrating this Independence Weekend, this weekend where we celebrate our freedom. On the Statue of Liberty, many of you know the poem, which reads in part, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It doesn't say, "Give me your white Christian heterosexuals." It's liberty and justice for all people. And welcoming the stranger is an American tradition. That's what we're about, welcoming the stranger. Now, the front cover of your bulletin today says, "Holy Welcome." We are called to extend that holy welcome to everyone. We are called to welcome and love the stranger But unfortunately, most of us fear the stranger. We fear people who are different than us. And of course, that's perpetuated by many politicians and by the media. They tell us things like our borders are unsafe when they're the safest they've ever been in our nation's history. They tell us things that terrorists are trying to kill us, when the truth of the matter is that you're most likely to be killed being struck by lightning than you are by a terrorist. They want to keep us afraid of one another. They want us to fear the stranger. But we are being called to love the stranger. It's what America's about, and it's what being a Christian is about. One of my favorite spiritual writers is Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen passed away in the 1990s. But he wrote a wonderful book about us moving from hostis to hospice. So he uses the Latin words. Hostis meaning hostility, and hospice meaning hospitality. That we have to move from a society moving from hostility to hospitality. And here's what he said. The movement from hostility to hospitality is hard, and it's full of difficulties. Our society seems to be increasingly full of fearful, defensive, aggressive people, anxiously clinging to their property and inclined to look at their surrounding world with suspicion, always expecting an enemy to suddenly appear, intrude, and do harm. But our vocation is to convert the hostis to the hospice, to convert the enemy into a guest, and to create a free and a fearless space where brotherhood and sisterhood can be formed and fully experienced. I love that. That's what we are being called to do. That's our vocation, is what Nouwen says, to take the enemy and turn the enemy into a guest so that everybody can be free and free of fear. This is exactly what Jesus is calling the disciples to do in today's gospel message. What Jesus was doing is he was sending his disciples forth into foreign lands. And he knew that in those foreign lands they would be the strangers, and that they would probably have some hostile reaction. But Jesus calls them to extend a holy welcome to all whom they meet. To everyone that they encounter, is to spread that message, that good news of love for all people. Jesus was trying to dissolve boundaries. Boundaries are created by governments, they're created by societies, and they're created by religions. Jesus wanted to dissolve all of those boundaries. I've shared with you this story before. It is about a man who had fish in a small little fish bowl. And he needed to clean the fish bowl, so temporarily he put the fish in a bathtub. And even though the fish now were in a much larger body of water than in their little fish bowl, they were still swimming around in that little space the size of their fish bowl. Jesus is calling us to go beyond the boundaries of our little fish bowl. Many of us live in a little bubble. We have to go beyond that. We have to see all people as one. So this Independence Week, I'm calling you to look at your own life and to say, am I really free? Am I free of fear? Am I free of worry? Am I free of my ideas about what it means to be a man or a woman or a Christian or an American? To be free means not to be bound by limited ways of thinking, limited ways of seeing, limited ways of being. Some people are not free because they're limited by dogma. They can't break free of the way that they were raised in terms of understanding Scripture. But once you're able to break free of these things that limit you, you're free. This is what happened in the Bible from beginning to end. It's biblical. Moses led people from slavery to freedom. It's a symbol of the spiritual path. Jesus taught us about the way of salvation. What he meant was the way to freedom. He's saying, if you want to know the way to freedom, do as I did. Love all people. Forgive instantly. Serve others. Welcome the stranger. That's the way to freedom. You'll be free that way. But if you don't live that way, you're going to be fearful of the stranger. You're going to be resentful. You're going to be worried and anxious. The spiritual path is the path from fear to love. That's what the path is. Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's freedom. So what is that truth he was talking about? Well, that truth is that everyone is created in the image and likeness of God. Everyone. People of every religion and people of no religion. That means that all of us are brothers and sisters. It means that all of us are one. Once you know that truth, really know it, and start living from that truth, you'll be set free. So this Independence Week, let us remember that none of us are free until all of us are free. Namaste.